Thank you, Harold, and good morning to everybody. I know that we all share an appreciation, and I as well want to thank the Chief for welcoming us here, along with Elder Commanda, for your words, Bertha, this morning, the prayer. As you know, Elder Commanda sits as the National Elders Council co-chair, and it's okay, it's just water, Regional Chief. We had a little water spilling accident up here, just so that you know, it's just water. Elder prayed for water. That's okay. Elder prayed for water as well. Elder Commanda is also an educator by trade, decades in education, caring deeply about it, reflecting to us as an executive all the time about the importance not just of education, but in our ways of learning, in our language, that it is really, as she reflected back to us, it's about lifelong learning. It's about hearing the songs this morning and having our spirit, as I hope and I'm sure others felt, giving appreciation for the drum. That's part of our work and of our learning. It touches the spirit, touches the soul, touches the heart, helps to remind us who we are and where we come from. And while our songs may be different, the language used to express our heart, to say our prayers, may be different in our respective territories. It's what Chief White Duck helped to reflect back. We are indeed a diverse peoples. And when he references that 40-year history, I think, as I stand before you, that I was at that time 5 years old. My teacher was my dad, who happens to be with us here today. That's when First Nations control, or Indian control of Indian education, was being understood and being uttered by so many across our respective territories. And so it's there that I wish to express my gratitude and thanks. Thanking you, Chief White Duck, for welcoming us here into your territories and being appreciative for the prayer and the strong words that we've already heard. The intervention that has been made, expressing appreciation to the Chief. Those are important reflections. Why? Because we're talking about our children. We're talking about their opportunity to learn, to find their potential. We're talking about overcoming that long, dark shadow that still is cast over all of our peoples, in fact, over this country that's now called Canada, that has within its history the residential schools that we're still feeling its effect today. Or what about the efforts back in '69 of the white paper on Indian policy? This was what our leaders at that time collectively were pushing back against. 40 years later, I listened in on a conversation to two gentlemen who were saying we're getting old around the push to tackle these challenges. And so we are but the most recent to tackle what is deeply held and shared in all of our hearts, and that is a better way forward. Those back in the authors of Indian Control, they said, and I quote, "Integration viewed as a one-way process is not integration and will fail. In the past, it has been the Indian student who is asked to integrate, to give up their identity, to adopt new values and a new way of life. This restricted interpretation must be radically altered if future education programs are to benefit Indian children." Words true in 1969, as I'm sure there's shared notion, true today. This is where we find ourselves once again. And so today, and over the next couple of days, having followed instruction by the Chiefs in Assembly this summer, you'll recall that conversation for those who were there. We said we would gather again, that we would take this discussion to the next step. Thank you to all of you education leaders, to people like Bertha who have been devoting, in some cases, your entire lives to learning, the learning of our peoples, lifelong learning, in the school systems, in your territories, in the urban centers. I know that my fellow colleagues on the executive share a sense of appreciation for you taking the time here, because we're really talking about the dreams of our ancestors as well. We know too well all of those intergenerational impacts that have impacted our people. The attempted assimilation and integration policies of governments, as well as the impacts, as I said, of the residential school. The Chief made it very clear. Education has been used in the past, as we've spoken, as an instrument of oppression, used against us, emphasizing the removal of our identities, in fact, tearing children away from their very families, territories, the history of their treaties, their rights, their languages, even an attempt to pull us away from our way of thinking and being, that which is so rich from each of our respective territories. For we have, as we heard here this morning, still our languages despite these efforts, where our teachings can be brought forward. The power of education is real. It's tangible. I think at moments like this of my late grandmother, whom I know you've heard me speak of her periodically. She talked about the resilience of her own family, her own children. She talked about education so often, that we don't need to fight our battles with our fists any longer. We fight our fight with education, she would say. This is the way that we will be strong and that we will win our future. Our challenge this week then is, as Elder Commanda helped reflect back and Chief White Duck, is to work to overcome what periodically holds us back, our differences, overcome the challenges of the past, and turn education from an instrument of oppression into a tool of liberation, of freedom and reconnection of our people to our history, our culture, our language, our teachings. And so this is about being absolutely clear where our focus lies. It is about our children's success coming first, and this being our measure of progress. I want to make it clear, particularly in response to the question, that there have been no backroom deals. There's been no conversations about cutting some sort of an agreement behind closed doors. The important aspect of this work is that it be right in front of all of us, that it's a shared challenge. The role of the executive and the office of National Chief, as we're reminded so often, is, let's be clear, we are not holders of title and rights or treaty rights. That belongs to First Nations governments and their citizens, who First Nations governments are accountable to. Our job has always been about helping to open doors or kick them down, to compel governments to come to the table in a meaningful way. This was the vision of the ancestors for those who forged treaties in your respective territories. It is the vision that was there for Indian control 40 years ago. It remains the vision here today. Our task is to find common ground, to come to a sound and powerful strategy this week in the name of the well-being of our children. And you in particular, as the education leaders and chiefs, we're asking you to help bring your hearts and minds together. Can we build, as Chief White Duck suggested, a strong strategy, a sense of consensus? And then the idea being, let's bring an approach to the Chiefs in Assembly this December at the Special Chiefs Assembly. So an important moment to fold and reflect amongst ourselves that there was no interest or expressed in the planning for this meeting that we would reach out to government and invite the minister, but that simply what we'd want to hear is a reflection from the government. What is their thinking, so that we can have that be a part of our first day of information gathering. This work is not about, and it must not be about, anything except no longer accepting the discrimination that our children face every day, in trying to achieve an education in our communities that all other Canadians take for granted. Think about the work that our shared work with Cindy Blackstock. Cindy, I just want to say good morning. Thank you for being such a strong partner and advocate for our children, standing together as we are on the issue of child welfare before the Canadian Human Rights Commission, the tribunal, working with the Commission. And now we're going to continue to stand together in the area of education. This being a reflection that we are using all tools available to us to reflect this challenge that has been so dear to our heart. Feels like it's been so long in the works. As our elders teach us, and as we've been rightly reminded here this morning, we must be cautious. Absolutely. We must be cautious. Be careful. I hear this not only in my home territories, from the elders when we're gathered to discuss challenging issues, particularly that are so close to our heart, but I hear it, as I have the great privilege to, in this role, in so many of your respective territories also. Because as the sentiments have been already expressed, there is not a tremendous reason to be compelled to feel trust on the way in which governments have treated us. It is indeed a challenge that we're collectively faced with. There is also a long history of Crown and the government attempting to divide and conquer us. These terms, willing partner. Who's the willing party? We'll work with the willing party, they will say. And so on the one hand, we see great successes. Think about the legacy of the late Shannon Kustachin. Her working with her fellow students, lobbying on the Hill so that a school might be built in Attawapiskat. It's an example of an incredibly powerful legacy on her part. Shannon's dream continues to this day, this campaign. We see these efforts across our respective territories, schools being built, young people graduating from high school, those young people going on to post-secondary to pursue trades and apprenticeships, becoming political and educational leaders, the likes of which we have in this room. And yet we're very well aware and have our eyes wide open about government attempts to divide us, not only between and amongst communities within regions, but between regions as well. Therefore, I think it was a very wise notion that so many leaders said, let's begin this 3-day conversation by hearing from each other in our respective regions. Let's not allow governments to have this sense, well, I've got something here, I don't know if I should share it with you over there. Let's pull back that and share with one another, for therein we have the opportunity to understand that diversity, the differences between the respective regions, and hear how it is that governments might be speaking to us. We also know we've got increasing recognition on the part of Canadian society. Who can forget the moment this summer when Wesley Prankert, that 13-year-old non-Indigenous young man from Niagara Falls, stood up? He talked about raising $70,000 for that playground in Attawapiskat, receiving not one but 2 standing ovations by the chiefs and delegates in Assembly this summer. He made it so clear from that tender age that this is, in his words, this is not about charity, this is about justice. And so that work continues to even this day, that we continue to pursue that sense of justice for our young people. There are effective partnerships, meaningful partnerships that many of you are forging with others from Canadian society. Average Canadians are joining with the help and leadership of people like Cindy. They're joining us, being prepared to help drive the change and walk with us. I don't think we have to, and we must not ignore the tremendous challenges that we face. You know this. I know this. There is also no doubt that when the elders suggest strongly that we must stand together and stand firm, that this is another moment like that. Despite these challenges, I do see reasons for optimism, us coming together. I do see opportunity. I see the drive and energy of our people, especially the young people, the dedication by the leadership. When we rose together in Assembly in the winter of 2009, as the Chief helped reflect back, and the clarity of vision of our elders from our respective territories. When our young people do finish school, they're twice as likely to get a job. When they graduate from university, their earnings are triple. And more importantly, this has been on the lips of so many of our leaders, our young people, when they get their schooling, are coming home. They're starting families, they're helping to rebuild their entire communities. helping to replace despair with hope, independence, and success. To achieve this success, what we've already heard here is what I agree and believe so strongly. It must be us as First Nations who are driving the change for our people. Attempts to adopt provincial approaches and guidelines are completely unacceptable and rightfully rejected. It is time to turn the page on the failed policies and approaches of the past to give full life and expression to First Nations control of First Nations education. And being absolutely clear on the critical elements as was expressed in resolution at our AGA in Mississauga of the new credit territories: funding, jurisdiction, systems, and language. Every conversation that I have with leaders all across our respective territories comes to the issue of funding, a guarantee which is accountable to First Nations people and addresses the actual costs of high quality and culturally relevant education. And as was referenced here, we absolutely have reports going back 30 years. Report after report has confirmed what we all know in this room, the change that's required. Jurisdiction over education, the restoration of jurisdiction is imperative if real change is to occur. This means implementing the treaty right to education and fully respecting our inherent rights and responsibilities. Thirdly, education systems, where they do exist, require recognition and long-term funding support. Where they are emerging, they require the freedom to innovate and to respond to community needs, rather than have some sort of top-down, prefabricated mold imposed. Those are strong principles that have been consistent since the advent of Indian control of Indian education. It's about creating the space for fully functioning systems that are supported at a broad level, not to oversee or restrict, but to empower, to enable, to support transformation led at the community level. As the leaders from 1972, they spoke specifically about language and culture, and I quote, "Unless a child learns about the focus which shape him, the history of his people, their values and customs, their language, he will never really know himself or his potential as a human being." Indian culture and values have a unique place in the history of mankind. The Indian child who learns about his heritage will be proud of it. The lessons he learns in school, his whole school experience, should reinforce and contribute to the image he has of himself as an Indian. Once again, powerful expression, an idea, words so true in 1972 as they are today, make me once again be filled with a sense of gratitude for the opportunity to learn about my own heritage and culture. Language is the soul of our identity. Any national initiative in education must be built on the core foundation of the recognition of our languages and cultures. Our goal here is to build a strategic plan respective of all of our various roles and responsibilities, to carry forward and accomplish these very important goals. A strategic plan that highlights the principles and the common essential elements, as well as details the steps we must take to respect one another and achieve this change for our children. This plan will advance First Nations control of First Nations education in a way that is locally determined, regionally driven, and nationally supported. It's about being resolute and firm that it will be First Nations who will, on our terms, determine the rate and pace of the development of any legislation. First Nations will determine the breadth and scope of any education reform initiative, including legislation, within the context of supporting the Assembly's overall strategic plan and in the context of the standard of free, prior, and informed consent. There is a tremendous that's at stake here. First Nations view education through the lens of our identity, our languages, our ceremonies, our cultural responsibilities, and in particular, our relationships to each other and to all creation. We know that schools can help prepare our young people to assume their responsibilities to themselves, their families, their clans, communities, and their nations. We also know that there are broader economic benefits which will result from improving First Nations education outcomes. And so I finish where I began. 40 years ago, when I was starting kindergarten, as the story goes, I snuck into kindergarten, actually. I was too young. I wasn't supposed to be in class yet. But you see, we lived in the teacherage at the back of the one-room school building where our school was. I couldn't understand how come all the other kids got to be in class and I didn't. And it just so turns out that I had a little bit of pull at that time because Dad was the principal and the teacher. And I snuck into class. Here I am, age 45, thinking back to a moment in time, 40 years ago. Some of you were in the rooms when Indian control of Indian education became the forefront of a push amongst our leadership. And I know I joined so many others, especially us younger people, for thanking you for that unwavering commitment and leadership. The First Nations leadership presented Indian control of Indian education to the Minister of Indian Affairs as a blueprint for change at that time, designed and developed by First Nations peoples. And so, the request that I make is that let's build on this foundation, this exact foundation. Let's take this opportunity to bring our minds together, build on the issues we have in common, and find a way forward which will benefit our people now and far into the future. By working together now, we can achieve this vision. I want to express my appreciation once more to each and every one of you for taking the time to come for this incredibly important discussion. Wish you the best for the duration of the meeting. I look forward to spending time listening to you and working with you for the benefit of especially our young people, and for those little ones that are yet to come. Miigwech. Thank you. Teko, teko.